Fanfare, please.
So, once upon a time,
The year was 1908.
Jacksonville's William Jennings Bryan is nominated as President of the United States.
The Cubs beat the Tigers in the World Series.
You're kidding.
Nothing but the truth this afternoon.
1908.
Oklahoma is added to the U.S. flag.
And Henry Ford's first Model T, $825.
Cincinnati Mayor Mark Bright stood before the City Council and announced,
Women are not physically fit to operate automobiles.
Did the Cubs actually win the World Series?
General Baden Powell starts the Boy Scouts of America.
Orville Wright makes the first 1-hour flight.
The first Mother's Day.
John Crone becomes the first man to walk around the perimeters of the United States.
Mr. and Mrs. James Murdoch became the first to travel across the United States by a car. A Packard. 32 days, 5 hours, and 11 minutes.
The Chicago Cubs.
And this song got its first copyright.
Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Just buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Let me root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
And in 1908,
In 1908,
Young Lawrence Seibert took a job working for Ward Brothers, a printing and bookbinding company in Jacksonville, Illinois.
The Seiberts came here from Germany during the Revolutionary War and landed in the state of Virginia raising cattle. Then in the mid-1800s moved to a farm south of Jacksonville.
Morgan County was only 33 years old.
Then 2 generations later, along came Lawrence. LD, we call it. His job was cutting the corners off magazine bindings, and he helped set the brass type for the covers.
By 1913, he'd become foreman.
oh, way to go, Lawrence.
he fell in love with one of the Ward Brothers employees, Jessie Irene Duncan of Chapin, and in 1915, they added on to their family business. His name was Robert Frederick Seibert.
1920.
The 18th Amendment. No more booze.
Oh, well, Hamilton's was doomed.
Walt Disney starts work as an artist at $40 a week.
The first artificial rabbit was used at a dog track.
They formed the NFL.
And Babe Ruth sets a record, 54 home runs.
Cincinnati Reds center fielder falls asleep during a long argument on the infield. He's ejected for delay of game when they tried to wake him up.
The 19th Amendment. The ladies can vote.
Oh, well, the U.S. Post Office says that children cannot be sent by parcel post.
What?
I'm not making that up. That's what, no, they can't.
The Indians beat the Brooklyn Dodgers in the World Series.
Jack Dempsey becomes the heavyweight champ.
Bob Hope becomes an American citizen.
And Al Jolson had the top song of 1920.
Swanee, how I love ya, my dear old Swanee. I give the world to me, among the folks in DIX. I even know my family's waiting for me, pray for me, down by Swanee. The folks up north will see me no more when I get to that Swanee shore.
And in 1920, Seibert started a library bindery known as New Method Book Bindery with his brother-in-law, William T. Suey. Suey hit the road as the salesman, and Seibert ran the bindery with his 3 employees.
3 employees. They worked fast and hard.
Oh, and their fingers got tired sewing and sewing and sewing.
Meanwhile, back way out in California, the great discovery. Go! No. over sewing machine. W.M. Remus got this idea.
If you could just come up with a machine that could stitch those books, why heck, we could do hundreds in a day.
And so Seibert and Suey said,
Say that again.
I can't. So Seibert and Suey said, let's get one of those rascals.
And all over the country, libraries and schools started sending their books to Jacksonville to be rebound. The first part of the 20th century saw a boom in library building, and we were headed to the big time.
1923.
Somebody invented the USSR.
The first issue of Time magazine.
Firestone's first inflatable tire.
Yankee Stadium opens.
The first non-stop transcontinental flight, New York to San Diego.
Harry Houdini frees himself from a straitjacket while suspended 40 feet upside down in New York City.
The Yankees beat the Giants for the World Series.
Hitler arrested for trying to seize power in Germany.
160 days of 100-degree temperature in Australia.
The first president on the radio, Calvin Coolidge.
Well, meanwhile, back in Jacksonville.
We're running out of room. Business was booming, but the walls were busting with books.
Time to move. We picked up shop and started hauling things from the second floor of Deegan's Dance Hall at 220 South Main to our new location in Brown's Business College building at 201 South
Kosciuszko.
Gesundheit.
Then came that fated day.
We were lowering down a pallet of finished books, headed for the Des Moines Public Library. We were using the second floor lift to the ground. Then it happened.
Look out below!
No! The lift broke, and a whole load of books came crashing to the ground.
Somebody's gonna be in trouble.
We walked over to the crash pile. Couldn't believe our eyes. Out of the entire shipment of books,
Out of the whole thing.
only 1/4 of one book was damaged. And some bystander said,
Those books are certainly bound to stay bound.
The company slogan was born.
but I still can't pronounce
Who cares? We were booming. And the hit song of 1923. Sorry now. Sorry now. Whose heart is able breaking down? Who's sad and blue? Who's crying too? Just like I cried over you. Right to the end, just like a friend. Time to warn you somehow. You have your way.
You had your way.
Now you must pay.
Now you must pay.
I'm glad that you're sorry now.
And so one day, Mr. Seibert noticed something.
these same books,
Said Mr. Seibert.
these same books keep coming back to be rebound.
A Peter Pan, The Wind in the Willows, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, The Tale of Peter Rabbit, The Secret Garden.
The problem was in the school library.
I want it. I had it first. It's my turn. Give me that book. Oh, wait. You just tore the book.
These same titles they kept being rebound and rebound and rebound.
So, Mr. Seibert had an idea. He said,
What if we bound them stronger before they got into those little hands? What
he
if
said,
we bought batches of new children's books and pre-bound them?
Wow. Great idea, boss.
Then let's do it.
and so pre-binding was born, a new method in the 1920s, hundreds of copies of new books were purchased and then made kid-proof before they were released.
The American Library Association climbed on board and came up with the specifications, and Lawrence Seibert smiled.
I think this might be a good idea.
Dad. And so, pre-binding was added to rebinding, and we were off again. According to him, Henry Ahrens, hired in 1924.
It was a good job. $8 a week. We sewed books by hand, used beeswax bars on the needles to make them work better, sanded and re-glued them. The glue was made from animals and it had an odor, so we mixed it with blackstrap molasses and water and cooked it on a gas stove.
And Henry went on.
It was one of the worst ice storms Jacksonville had ever seen. But in those days, you didn't call and say, I can't make it. So I slapped skates on the bottom of my shoes and ice skated to work. Got there on time, too.
400 books was a good day's work.
And Henry added,
I started off setting type when I was a kid, then sort of worked my way up to the better jobs. That's the way it went. You finally got a pretty good job just before you died.
Started in 1924 at $8 a week. Women were paid $7.
Men were paid 8 and women were paid 7.
Well, they put our $1 bills in these little cellophane envelopes. I'm not sure why they did that.
Yeah.
Well, everything had to be perfect for Mr. Seibert. He would go through the plant, sit, and watch the operations.
And that's where Henry Ahrens met his first wife, Edna.
But it was a different time then. You dressed right for the workplace. You worked hard between the starting bell and the end of your shift. You sat up straight at your desk, and you didn't waste anything.
if LD saw a half-used pencil in the trash, you pull it out.
Running out of room, we opened a hand-binding shop in Root House.
1929, running out of room, built a 1,200 square foot addition.
1931.
A loaf of bread cost 8 cents. A gallon of gas was a dime, and the average new car would cost you $640.
The Dust Bowl. The Midwest blew.
Hey, something just flew over my head. What was it?
Kansas.
The Empire State Building opens its doors. It's the tallest building in the world.
Our national anthem becomes the Star-Spangled Banner.
The Great Depression spreads around the world.
2,500 U.S. banks fail.
Leonard Nimoy, Dr. Spot, was born.
And so was Captain Kirk.
And if you turned on your brand new Motorola radio, you might hear...
I got rhythm, I got music, I've got my gal who could ask for anything more.
I got daisies in green pastures. I got my man who could ask for anything more.
Home and trouble, I don't mind him. You won't find him round my door.
I got starlight, I got sweet dreams. I got my man who can ask for anything more.
Who can ask for anything more?
The Great Depression.
From the Jacksonville Courier.
If there has been a depression, the new method bookbindery knows nothing of it. There have been no hard times at the local planters.
We were busting at the seams again, so Mr. Seibert added on to the building on Kosciuszko with 250 employees.
Wowzers!
And then came this kid.
This kid.
Robert F. Seibert, Lawrence and Jesse's only child, began working at the bindery while he was still in high school. His first job, setting type on a Ludlow machine and inventing a card inventory system. The employees say they'd see him come to work bouncing a basketball.
Robert graduated from Illinois College, Jim then joined the business as treasurer in 1936.
1937, New Methods buys out Ward Brothers Bindery and puts in the...
Look out!
And puts in the...
What did they put in? What?
roller skates! It was Robert's idea.
And then in 1941, the world changed.
The Germans bombed Wales.
6,000 Jews exterminated in Romania.
German troops land in Africa.
Jews rounded up in Amsterdam.
Captain America comic book appears.
Germans invade Bulgaria.
50,000 British troops land in Greece.
Churchill warns Stalin of German invasion.
The German Air Force bombs London.
Yugoslavia surrenders to Germany.
The first organ was installed at a ballpark by the Chicago Cubs.
Didn't do any good.
General Mills introduces Cheerios.
Greece surrenders to Germany.
Germany bombs London's House of Commons.
The world's first computer was invented in Berlin.
Joe Louis is the heavyweight champion.
The first Jeep is produced. Construction begins on the Pentagon. Stan Musial makes his major league debut.
Nazis slaughtered 34,000 Jews in Russia.
Mount Rushmore is completed. Japan declares war. San Francisco blacked out, and
Pearl Harbor.
Young Robert Seibert joined the U.S. Army. I think it's me. So young Robert F. returned home after the war and then took an even more auspicious journey, this time to Louisiana for a library meeting, and that's where he met.
He met
He met this pretty little librarian at the Vermilion Parish Library.
She was a World War II vet as well, Jessica Boatner. She'd been warned about these pushy book salesmen from up north. But this guy representing New Methods.
This guy was different.
And so, later that same year,
The same year,
Robert didn't waste time.
Meanwhile, back at the bindery,
When Johnny came marching home from the war, things started happening.
and happening.
The baby boom.
All across the nation, the schools were swamped with children, and the need for pre-bound books went through the roof. It was more than we could handle.
1948, New Method Bookbindery was the largest single binding unit in the entire world.
Customers in 38 states, Hawaii, Canada, and South America.
500,000 books a year with a payroll of over $300,000.
1950, Ralph Evans was hired as a salesman, and according to Ralph,
I knew Mr. and Mrs. Seibert in junior high working at a drugstore. I listened to him talk about traveling, and boy, it was heaven on earth.
Ralph got a job as a traveling salesman for the company.
It was Eisenhower's first move to try to beat the Russians. He wanted us to become a reading society. Oh, I was the youngest man that they had ever hired, so they bought me a used Chevrolet coupe, just in case it didn't work out. Well, it was the runniest car that I had ever seen in my life. It had some huge trunk space.
But sometimes
The book sales didn't work very well.
well, see, the state of Mississippi really liked our books because they held together so well. I sold a bunch of Zane Grey and Grace Livingston Hill titles in Carthage, Mississippi, and the state librarian came to visit.
Then came the phone call from the state librarian of Mississippi. The local librarian called and was in tears.
Mr. Seibert!
Yes.
Well, these books, I'm sorry, but the state librarian does not like the titles. Well, she thinks they're junk. And we've spent our entire budget on them. We just can't use them.
And Mr. Seibert said,
Then send them back.
Oh, we've already stamped our name
That's
in 'em.
all right. That's all right. Send them back.
And that was the kind of reputation that the Cybert were gaining all across the nation.
1952, we had to put on a 3rd floor.
1952, Jacksonville was officially declared the bookbinding capital of the world. Governor Stratton issued a bookbinding day.
Then Lawrence Seibert made an agreement with Lawrence and Ernest Hertzberg to form a new company for the rebinding business. The Hertzberg New Method Bindery in South Jacksonville, and the year 1954.
1954.
President
The
Eisenhower.
McCarthy hearings.
The first atomic submarine, Dr. Jonas Salk starts vaccinating kids for polio. The Giants beat Cleveland in the World Series, broadcast in color for the first time ever.
The first 707 jet.
Something wild and strange and terrifying starts sweeping the nation.
Kids love it.
Parents are horrified.
Rock and roll! Ain't nothing but a hell dog. Hell time. Ain't nothing but a hell dog. Hell time. Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go. You have made my life complete,
I know this isn't on. I'm doing the best I can.
and I love you so. Love me tender, love me true.
That's pretty.
All my dreams fulfilled. For my darling, I love you, and I always will.
1959.
Okay, a little geography lesson. You're not going to believe this, but in 1959, Jacksonville ended right around Massey Lane.
Oh, wow, you mean BW?
Oh, yes, before Walmart.
And the bindery at
Kosciuszko.
That word's killing me. Well, that location just couldn't handle the volume, so the Cyberts started looking west.
On the very far, far, far edge of Jacksonville.
And construction began on a 43,000 square foot new method.
Thank God. I don't have to pronounce that that word I can't pronounce again.
We knocked a hole in the side of the old building to move out the equipment.
And on the cornerstone, it said, dedicated to the preservation of the written world. A single level, no more stairs, and it was a heck of a lot easier to roller skate on concrete floors.
Look out! Out of my way!
I'm coming through!
And when the 1960s hit, things really started rolling.
According to John Doyle,
At New Method, I found that people never leave, so it must be a good place to work.
But Jacksonville was growing. More competition for workers.
Cordite in 1957, then it became Mobile Chemical.
1956, Anderson Clayton.
Capitol Records' second plant in 64. Carnation in 69.
in 1964, LD retired as president, and his son took over. Robert Seibert said,
I was caught in New York in 65 during the blackout. I was with a publisher and we were walking in the dark New York streets from his office. He was Catholic and he went into a church and swiped a bunch of altar candles for me to take to my hotel room.
the new building couldn't hold us, and we built on again in 1962.
Then again in 65, 67, 71,
78, 89, 91.
all the way up to 110,000 square feet.
The world's largest roller rink.
1970, we officially named ourselves Bound to Stay Bound and started making our own decorated covers and library cards. Then in 1978,
In 1978,
This new kid showed up.
Who's he?
he's the boss's son.
Uh-oh!
he seems normal. Gorgeous wife.
The young Robert Seibert, the one with an L in the middle of his name. The same kid who, it's rumored, learned to drive by making circles in the company parking lot and running into the building while he was doing it. No, Bob, I've got the stage. You can't argue.
And the following year, in 1979, Jacksonville lost one of its greatest businessmen. After 71 years in bookbinding, Lawrence Seibert passed on.
1891 to 1979. Beginning as a worker for Ward Brothers, working his way up to foreman, then founding New Method. Eventually with a sales force covering the nation.
The torch was passed.
Well, technology was on the move with upgraded and improved printing and binding equipment.
Then, the storm of 1982.
Storm? I don't remember a storm in 82.
Hurricane Sharon.
Sharon Zeiderfeld.
Hired to revamp the cataloging, and things changed forever.
1990, the Jacksonville Industry of the Year.
Then in 1992,
Ross Perot announces that he'll run against Bill Clinton and President Bush.
McDonald's opens its first restaurant in China.
Disney World goes to Paris.
The CWA goes bankrupt.
Bill Clinton is elected president.
Minnesota's Mall of America is built. Prince Charles and Princess Di separate, and Windows 3.1 is released.
Hollywood brings out Aladdin, Lethal Weapon 3, and Honey, I Blew Up the Kids.
Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Madonna, U2, Mariah Carey, Bon Jovi.
Eric Clapton and Def Leppard, Michael Jackson.
Home Improvement, Oprah, Jerry Springer, America's Funniest Home Videos.
And Miley Cyrus was born.
And the top song of that year,
I'm too sexy for my shirt. You can put it in up. You got
And
And in 1992, Robert L. Seibert took over as president of the company with Robert F. remaining as chairman.
Then in 1998, Jacksonville again suffered a loss. Robert F. Seibert, one of the stalwarts of the Jacksonville business community, and surely one of the most generous men our community has ever known. A Seibert Theater in Illinois College. 4 Robert F. Seibert scholarships at IC for Bound to Stay Bound employees.
The Robert F. Seibert Informational Book Medal awarded annually by the Association for Library Service to Children.
so, 107 years ago, young Lawrence Seibert took a job working for Ward Brothers, a printing and bookbinding company in Jacksonville, Illinois.
And 95 years ago, we came to who we are today.
pushing through each decade without a layoff, good times and bad, employing brothers and sisters, husbands and wives,
And through wars and storms and crises.
And through booms and busts and buyouts.
From the Charleston to rap music,
From the Model T to the Volkswagen Diesel.
from Teddy Roosevelt to Barack Obama.
the story of Bound to Stay Bound is the story of American business.
It's the story of Jacksonville.
It's the story of America.
And somewhere out there today in Minneapolis,
Or St. Louis, or San Francisco, or Brazil.
A mother is putting her daughter on her lap. She's opening a book and she's reading.
All children, except one, grow up. His name was Peter Pan.
The ball was working very hard all morning, spring cleaning his little home.
Dorothy lived in the midst of the great Kansas prairies with Uncle Henry, who was a farmer, and Aunt Em, who was the farmer's wife.
When Mary Lennox was sent to Misselthwaite Manor to live with her uncle, everybody said she was the most disagreeable-looking child ever seen.
Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter.
And somewhere, Lawrence, Robert L., and Robert F. are smiling as they hear a young child open her first book and say,
Once upon a time.